I'm Becca Smith, a solution architect here at Netgain. I'm a CPA and I started my career at Deloitte as a tax accountant. My legendary co-host, Chris Miller, is a NetSuite expert. He's our VP of product strategy here at Netgain, and he has over 6 years solutioning with some of NetSuite's largest enterprise clients. He's been a controller, CFO, director of finance, and many other roles. So let's jump in and tackle today's topic. Okay, so we actually dived super deep into our topic today, which means we have split this into 2 parts. So this episode is part 1. Make sure that if you like it, to go listen to part 2. Chris, okay, I'm excited to start talking today. We are going to be covering kind of limits of solutioning. So wanting to cover some of those questions around when you should be pushing the limits of software, when you work within it, and then also what like customization kind of looks like within different ERPs.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, well, I guess let's just start at the top. So obviously NetSuite is one of the biggest selling points is that they're super customizable, right? Being able to create saved searches, create your own reporting, being able to edit all those things, add in custom segments, right? So I guess you've worked in different ERPs. Can you give me a little bit of like a compare and contrast of what customization looks like within NetSuite versus others?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So if you kind of use NetSuite as like the base or the standard, you know, the ability to customize is one of NetSuite's tremendous strengths. And it used to be that it was also unique, like other people didn't do it. Like when I first, and you know, even to the point where many times NetSuite would have to almost try to convince people it was okay in the early days. I remember when we bought, I didn't believe any of it. And I was like, I don't want any of your customization stuff or anything like that. And
Is that just from like the accountant's mindset of I want controls in place?
Yeah.
And so it's like you can't change anything?
Yep, because I came from the world of part of that Great Plains. And Adam came from JD Edwards. And we used to talk about before we even knew NetSuite existed, but like if you wanted to change where a field was on Great Plains, you had to hire somebody. It'd be several $1,000s and, you know, who knows how long it would take. And you wouldn't even know what they did to change that. So the idea that you could make all these changes, you were just like, well, yeah, for like $1 million, you know, type thing.
Okay, so you're like hearing customization, you're thinking, okay, great, but I'm gonna have to pay for that.
Yep, exactly. Take JD Edwards, for example, another system that was kind of like an enterprise system, but it was that. Well, if you want to write a report, you would have to hire a consultant, and it would cost you a lot of money. But then it got worse. You would have to hire another consultant to interpret the report to say that it was correct because you had no clue how it was done or how it was done with coding.
You don't have any control on the back end, and so you don't have any controls on the front end.
Yeah, and so people would do – that was kind of the mindset 15 years ago. And one of the first things that people came in when they were talking about cloud software in general was like, hey, if you find something that works for you, it's really good, but you can't change it. You can't make it. And now you you roll this forward 15 years, and that's you would never. That's what you buy cloud software for, to make it customizable and shape it. And so that's been like a big change that's happened. But if you look at them, you know, and I have experience with a couple. So if you think of NetSuite has 2 things that kind of distinguish it. It has a no-code platform, and that's your point and clicks. So that's form creation, adding a custom field, adding a custom segment. And then NetSuite also has, we'll call it low code, and that's SuiteScript. That's where you can actually go in and you can write JavaScript and do a lot of things. When I say low code, it's because there's a library, you know, to call functions that helps you to say this, do this.
This is where you can go into ChatGPT and it's going to tell you exactly what you need. And you can just plug and play.
Exactly. And that's like really nice because that's been the thing. Because if you take customizations, you have, you take like a Nextworld, for example. It's a platform, but it's only point and click. You can't code it at all. And so you have to, it becomes kind of limiting.
So that's a lower level of customization.
And then you go, and then say you go to like to Workday, and Workday's really started building out their platform. They call it Extend, and there's things they can do with it, except it's like all code. There's no, you know, as it grows, maybe that will change, but essentially, people like us who are, we'll call ourselves like the development shops that run in NetSuite and do that, those don't exist over in Workday. It's PwC, it's Accenture, and it's Netflix as rolling out something that they did, because while you can customize it, it's not point and click. You got to start really knowing what you're doing.
If you have if you have Workday and you're looking to be able to do that type of code, are you then hiring a developer or like those consultants
You're
on
hiring
your end to like run all of that? Mm-hmm. Do you run into the issue where you were saying where like, okay, but now I need another consultant to come in and verify that all of that is like kosher?
With them, no, because one of the things that they do slightly different is where NetSuite's super open ecosystem, and for better or worse, you get like some really good developers, but then you get some people who are like, sure, I know how to be a NetSuite developer, and there's nothing. Theirs is very tightly controlled, so you can't go in and actually do anything until you've passed all their certifications and get it. Like, you can't become a partner until you pass the certifications and do that.
Which NetSuite has that too with like the SDN committees.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's just more, in my experience, practically, you can't even get started. It's like you have to be part of the...
It's not like you can come to them with like, here's a bundle of code, can you approve it? It's more like, I have to show that I'm even able before I'm able to start
That's
developing.
exactly it. So you have to be one of the approved people to even start doing it, and then you only start that process with them. So, so those are kind of the different extremes. And then you look at like an Intact. Intact has followed NetSuite's lead a little bit. They used to have no platform. Then they introduced kind of some point and click, customizations. And I've seen they've started actually doing some apps. For example, they released a very basic lease accounting app that is technically Intact native. They built it themselves, but they built it on the platform instead of the core. So that's like kind of like a first step to them trying to do what NetSuite did. And then, of course, on the low end, you've got QuickBooks, which is you buy it as is. And a lot of them, do that. There's really, I bet QBO has probably added some,
But like your average
fields.
user can't like edit anything inside of the QuickBooks
That's exactly right. And they're not creating fields, or the thought of creating an app or anything is, not possible.
Okay. That makes sense. And that's actually super helpful just to kind of get an idea of like the lay of the land when it comes to all the different ERP systems. So I guess, would you say that like NetSuite was the original and they're more like best in class? Or would you say that you think NetSuite is going to move towards like one of these? Or maybe it doesn't matter.
No, I think everyone aspires to be NetSuite or Salesforce. So like, because they were kind of born at the same time of the same thing, like Salesforce really leaned hard into the platform, they used to call it force.com. And what Salesforce did that was different than NetSuite, NetSuite's platform is designed completely around it all to interact with NetSuite, where Salesforce actually went one step further, and you can add stuff into Salesforce, but then over here is you would be amazed at how many apps we use in our daily life that's built entirely on the Salesforce platform, but has nothing to do with Salesforce. So take like...
Well, our lease accounting software is like that.
Yep.
Like you wouldn't have any idea you're in Salesforce. But...
That's exactly right. But it's built on the platform. Who else? Oh, our employee portal. I forget who they are. Completely Salesforce.
Okay.
Driven by them. So they're doing that, the custom, kind of built all on the platform. And you've got companies like Aptus and these that did. There are public companies that build everything actually just on Salesforce. So it's a pretty. So that part of it, the variety and kind of like the breadth of what they can do. Salesforce's platform is bigger than that. Like you wouldn't think to build a unique app with NetSuite, it would be meant to tie in where you could do that at Salesforce. However, if you stop and look at like the premise of what NetSuite wanted to be, and Zach used to say this when I would hear him, was they would kind of start out, and then the dream was someone would come in, and he actually used this as an example. Someone would come in and build out who knew a lot about being a veterinarian, and would come out and create everything that it took to be a veterinarian on NetSuite, and then that's would become exactly what they wanted and how to do that. And that's kind of what they were really they were enabling that to be, because
which is where we come in, like, right? We know a lot about lease accounting and fixed assets, and so we came in and created that within the system.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's
plug
and that's really where they wanted the depth to come from for these things. And it's actually makes it innovation can happen really fast, because most you think of a lot of ERP systems. You take like Oracle Cloud, or you take a Workday, or even an Intact. Like, they all have like industries that you kind of think of you would use them here. Where NetSuite, it's almost ubiquitous, because you can turn, if you stop and really think about what you need, you can create almost anything. Like, I go back to when at ClearChoice, when I first did it, and I was like, we just want a plain vanilla box. We essentially want Great Plains. And then you fast forward a year, and we had like tricked it out for everything for dental. It was, we had done this around implants and this, and it became not really even NetSuite, but it became kind of like the ClearChoice ERP doing exactly what we wanted. And when people do NetSuite really well, that's kind of what happens is you take that and get it just right to how you want it to be and do, and that's kind of the purpose of the whole platform.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. Basically, I would say NetSuite almost sits in the middle then of being able to both have some of that click and play type of customization available, as well as the actual code ability as well.
Yeah, and that really gives you the best of both worlds. So before we kind of get into what you think, how would you use it and do it?
Right. That's where I'm going.
Yep. Sometimes you need something more. If you do all click and code, the danger of that is when you make the platform, you have to almost anticipate every way that someone would use something.
Right.
To make it into a click and code.
You can't make it specific to the dental industry, because you don't know what their specific needs are.
Exactly right. And it can be like even not so much the name of something. You think, well, I can name it, but like a certain process. I need this to do this and then create this. And that's where the coding comes in. But some of the most powerful but worst design software used is when the developer guys are like, I'm sure this is how they want to do this. And you let the people who like really know the industry or how to use it, they're not involved. And so what you get is this thing that
it's a discrepancy, basically. If I have a set software that doesn't necessarily line up with what the industry needs.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's where the click and code comes from. So, I mean, honestly, we do sometimes development a little bit different here, where people think of like, oh, I need to make requirements and gather requirements. And we kind of do, we definitely do all of that. We run it well. But many of our early apps, we get into NetSuite and you start building, this is what I want the record to look like. This is what I think it would do. Then after I do this process, I want this record to happen. And then I want this report. And we build all of that out, like storyboard it. And then development really becomes, how do I make this record turn into this record? And how do I then calculate this field that you say you need into this? And I know of nowhere else that you could actually do that kind of like prototyping, get it just how you want it to be, and then turn it over to the development team and say, okay, guys, now automate this. Now make it more powerful. Now make it pretty.
Right. Well, that's what the solution consultant does, is you're going and you're creating the records and you're saying, okay, I created this record, I created this field, it needs to populate this field. And that's like what you're able to then give an actual example to the dev team in an actual NetSuite account, which that actually goes really well into like the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is like, as a solution consultant, where do you kind of push those boundaries of, hey, I'm selling this to the client and I know it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, which happens all the time. Right. So that's a great question. So I've had a couple of them where it's like, people were like a couple of doozies where I've had to.
It's probably just that the client is huge, and so like that's going to drive innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I do in my thought process is I try to think, what can I repurpose in NetSuite that would work on a similar principle? And let me give you 2 examples. Because NetSuite has like manufacturing and distribution and software, you'll find that something that's very common in one industry is like an outlier or edge case in another one. So let me give you two examples of that. The first one would be a common one is a manufacturer would come and say, okay, I'm selling something, but then they're reselling it to somebody, and I need to know who that third person is. And a lot of times manufacturing people, I would be in things and they would be like, man, I'm not sure how to do that because the sales order sold to this guy. But then you step over to the software world, and reseller agreements are completely common. You have a partner that's your distributor, and then they're selling it to the end user. And then sometimes you bill the end user, sometimes you bill the partner, and it's like completely common. And all of that was actually set up like standard stuff inside of the software edition, if you will, of NetSuite. And so sometimes
Can I just pause you really quick out of curiosity? So when you talk about like the software edition and like a manufacturing edition, are those just modules inside of NetSuite?
Yeah.
Which ones are you talking about?
So what the different editions, that's probably I'm getting a little bit like the Suite Success modules, they'll do it. Different editions will have different features enabled in it. So for example, retail has things around like fulfillment requests and different pieces of inventory, like how to lookbooks and things like that are in all of NetSuite, but they're turned off in the other editions. And then
so there really is like an edition essentially of NetSuite that you're downloading.
Yeah. And so it's like,
and then stuff's just enabled essentially.
Yeah, it's a collection of enabled features. And
so then when you're saying that like, hey, you downloaded the manufacturing one, but go in and enable some of these features that are related to software.
That's exactly right. You go in and you use the software and you set up the partner and the end user thing. And now all of a sudden what you have is
that ability
to do exactly that. And so a lot of times it's almost like that, like when you're a solution consultant and, you know, at NetSuite especially, you get very verticalized, which is great. You want to build depth and know the industry. But if I was to give a piece of advice, what I did was because I went everywhere, I was always having to study all the pieces to it. And so and now NetSuite's gotten so vast that there are things that if you like go, well, I don't know, but if you know kind of what some of the other industries are doing and that it's a common in another industry, you'll find that NetSuite typically is someone's thought of something or there's something that's there. The other example I'll give you was actually one we were at, which at the time was, I'll say it was Hewlett Packard. And so we were in this opportunity, we were somewhat shocked that we were even invited to the room. So everybody, Jim McGee was there. We had everyone, and I was the SC, and myself and Joe Friedman. And so everyone's like, "Wow, we can't believe how we actually got invited into the room here to do it."
Yeah.
And but we were kind of doing some things. But I was actually at another. I was splitting time between the presentation at HP and then doing a dental company, and as different as so they made it was Invisalign, and this is kind of a separate thing for intercompany. So Invisalign wanted to sell things, and it would kind of go through a couple of subsidiaries. I sell it at this and this, like a little bit like transfer pricing,
stuff.
International. So it's intercompany, moving goods from one company to the other. How do I control the margins? And I had spent a fair amount of time trying to figure that out. Well, lo and behold, like on the meeting I wasn't at, Hewlett Packard said, "Okay, guys, this is a way we do things internationally, and we have this selling entity that sells to this selling entity. This entity sells to this selling entity."
I'm already hearing
it. And I wasn't there. And essentially, what the answer that came out was, "Oh, we can't do that. We don't know how to do that." And it was like, well, then this meeting's over. And so I get this call, and it was like, "Chris," it was to the effect of, "We're dead in the water unless you've got something that's magical.
Gonna magically be able to make this happen."
That magically make this happen." And it was like, yeah, I can do that. Don't worry about it. And then it was just like,
But
because
it's coming from the dental company.
but it's coming from Invisalign, exactly that, and doing that. And so, and what I had done was we had released kind of like an intercompany type a buy-sell agreement. But people thought it was only going here. They didn't realize that you could like chain it together. And then if you controlled the pricing by the vendor, you could control the margin. And so it was like taking something that existed. And this is kind of my level one is there's stuff that exists in NetSuite. But if you step back and think, how can I reimagine or reapply it? You would be amazed at how standard features can be repurposed.
Sitting there inside of NetSuite going, how can I make this happen? And are you just like playing with different records? Are you like looking at the architecture?
Yeah,
like, what kind of triggers these brilliant ideas?
Oh, I don't know, bro. I'll usually have like a hypothesis, like, okay, what does this look like? And I try to, I'll kind of think. It's not deductive, inductive. I got to go make sure I get my words right. Someone will write us and be like, "You're an idiot." But I'm really good at kind of finding the similarities. And so if you break something down, so first you kind of look at like what's the real process and the principles are in vibe. Because accounting, a lot of times you're probably, and you see this all the time now too, Becca, is that because you see so many industries that can do that. But things really boil down to 10, 12 like accounting principles. And they may have a lot of different, they may be like, have different presentations, different names. Right. Maybe there's some wrinkles.
But at the end of the day, like I care about the debits and the credits happening in journal entry and how I'm going to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you stop and think about kind of what's the fundamental thing that they're trying to do, it almost starts to look like another thing that you know how to do,
I like that.
And that's really where I always start. And then I say, if it looks like this thing that I know how to do, oh, well, that looks like an allocation or an amortization just with a different thing, then now I've got a way to kind of start doing it. And that's kind of where I start, because I build a lot of stuff, but I hate to start there because fundamentally you don't want to like, if you scripted everything, then it becomes, well, it will work. But a lot of times what I worry about is it's fragile. So I can show someone something in a very fragile manner, like, it's that. And then what I end up turning over to the dev team is something where they have to make like anti-fragile. And that's where all the effort comes from. It's not so much, hey, you got to work in this one thing. So whenever it's like a core thing, I prefer that because then it works.
So
margin for error.
Towards like the core functionality inside of NetSuite.
Yeah.
And if you have to like go towards that process of kind of break it down to what are the debits and credits, what like GL impact are you originally or like at the end process looking for?
Yep.
And then is there anything inside of NetSuite that can give me that impact?
That's exactly it. Because you kind of want to break things into two parts. There's the GL impact, and then there's kind of the operational or informational. And if you were going to build things, it's almost always around that operational.
Yeah, because NetSuite does the GL pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where you put like the detail records, and we'll talk about that. The other kind of philosophy, and this is part of like the sales philosophy, is customizations should fall under kind of like a continuum. If it's back office, like fixed assets, and you'll hear this, is IW, you use the best practice, because on this side of the line, it's about reducing your cost per transaction. And if you start creating some unique depreciation formula and doing all these things, let's be honest, you're wasting your time and everybody else's time trying to look busy and important as an accountant. And so here it's like on one level in the back office, it's like adopt best practices and try to reduce your cost per transaction through standardization. And so that's where our apps like a lot of our back office apps, that's how they approach it, and we do it. But on this side of the line where you talk about customer facing, this is where your secret sauce is. And this is where the closer you get to your interaction with the customer, that's where you want to do more and more customization. That's where you want to spend your dollars. That's where you want to get the secret sauce.
And we've talked about that before. Like when you're looking at where to spend your time on like a deal, like spending your time on what the customer sees.
That's right.
And like the closer to the customer, that tends to be like the best place to spend your time in a demo prep. right?
Yep, that's exactly it. And then, of course, there are times when you have to do scripting. So if we talk about kind of the GL impact part of it, if there isn't something where I can get exactly what I want, that's when we'll make something. Yeah, because sometimes what you need is to get it to the journal or the debits and credits, I need something to be like a helper. I need
that little script that like runs it for me to be able to get the final impact because there's something missing.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's really where I'll spend the quote unquote customization time, is to get those pieces, because that's often the automation, and that's often the real pain point. And that's what is great about NetSuite is NetSuite's really good at doing simple, like take this number in this field, multiply it by this, and turn this into a journal entry that does this. And people are like, wow, how did you get to do, that's, and that's really what makes the scripting side really, really powerful. The advice I would give is like, I have tried. I am not I can't write code very well. I can write a little bit. I'm like one of those, the people that can like, when you travel and they're like, oh, well, I can speak Spanish, but I can't read Spanish.
Communicate, to get in trouble, but not out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's the phrase I've heard.
And so I can explain in the terms like, okay, guys, I need you to do this and this and this. And I needed to do this. So I can like explain to you I understand enough about how it should work, and I can read it and actually interpret what the code is doing, and sometimes even make modifications. But I have no talent for just being able to sitting down and creating out of nothing. I'm always impressed by that. But I would say as an SC, even if you don't have any talent for it like I do, the more time you spend understanding it, it pays dividends everywhere, because you can instantaneously know, can I do this or not do this? What will be the level of effort? Can I tell a customer, yeah, this is going to be pretty straightforward to do, or no, this is going to be really hard to do?
So when you're saying like go in there and like play with code, are you like, where inside a NetSuite are you doing that?
It's a good question. So what I've done is I'll take like in the old days, what I would do is I would take like the developer classes, and I would take them about once a year.
Yeah.
And I would work.
Those still exist.
Yeah, and I would work through those.
Developer classes.
But what I've been doing now, and which is light years ahead, is like right now we're working on like a collections app. So I've actually been having ChatGPT write code. So like I'll tell it, I need a suitelet that has these fields, and I need it to do this for this application. And I'll be like, write me the code, and then it'll write it, and then I'll go load it into NetSuite and look at it, and it'll be like, it doesn't work, and I'll be like, I need to do this or this. And as you do the different iterations, and then sometimes I actually have to go in and make some modifications, like, it doesn't know the name of the field, for example, that I want it to refer to. So I put that in and put in. To me, that's been the very, very best way ever to learn it. So it's
basically coming up with I want the program to do this, and seeing if you can even just get NetSuite to do it, and kind of coming up with your own little
exactly. So they have these.
Almost.
So now they have the thing when you do the paid version, it's like the pretext. So on the prompt, you can pretext it. And so, I did some asking around and some research, but like essentially I pretext all my prompts with like a bunch of NetSuite SuiteScript type stuff. This is your persona. This is what I'm looking to create. This is what I want you to do. I want you to create this. Give me these types of examples. Focus your code on these principles, and it will generate it. And so the days of like me just sitting around going, oh, the code's done it, that is a long ways away if ever will happen. But if you want to be able to like know how things work and what would it look like and what would it do, it's actually it's like an amazing change.
I think that's an excellent piece of advice, actually, because I feel like it's something that's time consuming. And so you're never going to do it unless you see that there is a benefit that'll come to your career from doing it. And even if you never decide to go into development, like, because I've always felt that way. If you understand how a computer thinks, then you understand what's possible.
That's right.
And I totally also agree with the thought of if you understand how difficult the code is on the back end of NetSuite, then it's much easier to go to a client and say, hey, we can do this, but it's going to take 40 hours of work, or it's going to take 120 hours of work. And then it also just gives like more realistic expectations in the sales cycle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the other thing is too, Becca, and I've seen you do this, is you can present them and deliver them with a lot of confidence. Yeah, and then you give them options. And that's probably the other thing too, is like you do a really good job of that, is okay, we could do it this way. Here's the coded version, here's kind of our halfway point that's like point and click type customization. And here's your manual workaround that quite frankly may only be 15 minutes a month, and so, and that's probably the other thing that happens when you start to know it. I've worked with a lot of really good SCs. However, when they don't understand this part, a lot of times what SCs would do would be like, well, you just write a script, you just do this and that, and it becomes you get a script, a workflow. It kind of becomes a euphemism for all things. And
it's the catch-all.
Yep. And
but if it becomes a catch-all, that's when you get clients that are unhappy when you get into the implementation cycle, because they're like, well, I was told you could do this, and you're like, yeah, but that doesn't. The logic doesn't exist.
That's exactly it. And so that.
Okay, well, that's the end of part 1. We do have a second part to this episode because we just kept talking. So if you liked this, continue and go listen to part 2.